Okay, I'd like to go ahead and start. I want to welcome folks. And you might still be coming in, but I'll go ahead and get started. Thank you so much for coming. Thanks to our audience for coming, and thank you so much to our presenters. My name is Jill Hawthorne. If you've seen a session before, you might have seen me say I'm an alum of the college, 87, and now I'm in Alumni and Family Engagement. Our team has been putting this orientation on, but it is only made possible by the special folks like our speakers today from the Pitzer and Claremont community that can that make it all happen. So this morning, we're very fortunate to have two amazing individuals join us to talk about the transition to college and the resources available for students as they go through the experience of coming to campus. Professor Marcus Rodriguez has really championed mental health and wellness and balance for Pitzer families through our Pitzer at Home series this past year and found a very special place in the hearts of many Pitzer families. Welcome. And Fiona Vajk, Assistant Director and Training Director of Monsour Counseling and Psychological Services for the Claremont Colleges, is, may I say, an old pro at talking with families during our orientation and also discussing the college transition for the whole family. And she will also be able to describe the mental health and wellness services and resources at the Claremont Colleges. Dr. Vajk and I worked closely when I served as a dean in the Dean of Students office. It's a pleasure to have her here with our session today. So thank you again. And with that, we'll take it, I'll pass it off. I do want to say if you have questions, you can go ahead and enter them into the Q&A or the chat. And once we have an opportunity to start addressing them, we can do that. So you can go ahead if you do have some. So thank you.
Awesome. So welcome, everyone. Yes, like Jill mentioned, my name is Marcus. I've been here for 3 years, so I feel somewhat new. I'm like a junior. I'm a rising senior, I should say, here at Pitzer. I'm a clinical psychologist, and I work with a lot of adolescents in my clinical practice, and a lot of my training has been in working with adolescents and young adults. And so the issues around how to help both kids and families transition is one that I deal with a lot. I deal with it more in, with clinical populations in my practice. And then here at Pitzer, I mean, I work with your kids. They're my students, they're my advisees, they're my research assistants. They are my, thesis advisees. And so for today, though, I think what I want to talk about is I want to speak to the parents. I think a lot of times when parents come to meetings like this, they're like, tell me what I can do to help my kid. And I think that there's a lot of resources for that. And I think Fiona will speak to that. And maybe what I can do to be most helpful is to speak to the parent side of things, of what is it that we can do as parents to make this transition as smooth as possible for ourselves and for our kids. And I think the question that I received via email was really specifically, and I'm sure there's a lot of questions, but one question is like, what do we do about our students who tend towards being more, whether it be anxious or depressed or stressed, right? Like there are some of our kids that have more challenges in regulating our emotions than others, right? We are not all on the exact same playing field in our ability to regulate emotions, and also not on the same playing field in terms of the challenges that we're faced in terms of stressors that challenge our emotion regulation. And so I get a lot of questions about what do I do for my kid? And I want to talk a little bit about, like, I'm assuming that our audience is parents, and I want to speak a little bit to that. And then Fiona will speak to us about resources at the 5 C's that we have for our kids. So I guess the first thing that I want to say is that transitioning to college is difficult, right? Like for a lot of kids, I think it's really, really exciting, but it's also a stressful thing. They're learning brand new things every single day, especially for the first several months. They're learning new things, experiencing new things. And while new can be exciting and fun, even if it's a pleasurable experience, it is stressful to learn. And I don't think that there's a way to transition to college that's not going to involve some amount of like disappointment and anxiety and stress. And I think if that's the goal, then I guess let me just say, like, as a mental health professional and as a professional, I don't think that's possible. So I think a part of what we can do as parents is to radically accept that's going to be a part of their experience. Is like, oh my gosh, I don't know how to do this. And like, if your kid doesn't know how to do that, probably no other kid does either, right? Like, I don't think your kid is like special in a bad way. Like, if they don't know how to use the library, like I didn't figure it out until I was in my PhD program, I don't think. So like, it's going to be okay. And I think if we can normalize the difficulties of transitioning, whether it be interpersonally, academically, as they develop their professional skills, that we as parents, what we can do is to not exacerbate that process. And I think what that can look like on the parent side is when our students are going through a stressful situation relating to, I don't know, maybe they've never had a roommate. So like living with a roommate or learning how to advocate for their needs directly with a professor, right? Like, whereas maybe in high school, a lot of times parents will get involved. For example, I give my cell phone to all my students. It's on my syllabus. I give it to all my research assistants, but I give them one rule. I say, never give my phone number to your parents. Like, if a parent calls me, I'm just going to say, if you have a concern about my teaching, or like, please call the dean's office. Like, I interact directly with students, right? But so on the one hand, like, they're learning now, how do I advocate for my needs when I'm going directly to a professor and I don't have my parents there, or I'm figuring out how to, do group projects where there's less oversight and a lot more autonomy. And the challenges academically are greater, and the difficulty balancing and creating structure is more than it has been. That when that comes up, oftentimes it will elicit emotions, right? And so some kids can stay with their primary emotion of like, I feel anxious or I feel sad. And some kids will jump to a secondary emotion, and maybe they'll get on the phone with parents like, week 2 or week 5 of school, and they'll express anger. Very seldom is anger a primary emotion unless someone is literally like stealing stuff from them or like actually bullying them, like physically, like, which I don't know if that, I don't think that happens a lot at Pitzer. I don't think we have like a real solid bullying culture here, right? But like, that's the situation where anger would be an effective primary emotion. But in general, anger is a secondary emotion. And so your kid will get on the phone. And what I hear often when I'm doing parent coaching is that parents will say, my kid is like so angry, or they're like super anxious and I can't help calm them down. And what ends up happening is they end up in their own emotion dysregulation and in their own emotional vulnerability. They end up expressing themselves in a way that's not very effective, right? They'll end up saying stuff like, I wish I had never come to college. Or they might say like, I'm never going to be good at this. They might end up saying stuff like, I can't succeed here. Or I can't, like, college isn't for me. Whatever it is, they're likely in their moments of emotion dysregulation to say something that is not very reasonable, right? Like, just like I could put other labels on it, but it's not very easy for you as a parent to hear that and be like, oh yeah, like I validate that. That makes sense. You probably hear, you're like, wait, what? Like, you're like so good. Like, you're so smart. You're so hardworking. You totally, like, you've got this. And so your urge is to invalidate them and be like, no, it's not that big of a deal. You've got this. And when we end up doing that because they're saying things that, or maybe they get on the phone and they're like mad at you, and then but maybe they're mad because they're feeling lonely, or because they're feeling like they're having a hard time connecting with their peers. And it's really easy for us as parents to take that at face value, and then we get emotionally dysregulated. And then in our own emotions or dysregulation as parents, we end up invalidating them. We end up we miss opportunities to validate their emotions and their thoughts and their experiences and say, yeah, that sounds really hard. Or like, I hear the part of what you're saying that makes sense. And yes, like I get that. So instead we invalidate them and we say something like, no, it's not that big of a deal. Like, we can fix this, like, or you shouldn't feel anxious, and that just makes them more upset. And then when they get more upset, they end up expressing themselves in a way that's less effective. And when they express themselves in ways that are less effective, and they're like, you know what, like, I'm not even going to go to class today. Well, then parents are like, well, then why am I sending you to the school? Or I don't, whatever it is. And it can turn into a vicious cycle. And I think that what can happen and what's really helpful for parents to do is to first step back and to first regulate our own emotions. And to make sure that when we're supporting our kids who are transitioning, and who knows what challenges they're going to face, but you've been there through high school and junior high, they had lots of challenges. So it's not like this has never happened. You've seen your child transition through different chapters of their life. And when they bring those concerns to you, like regulating your emotions, breathing, getting in touch, like calming down your breath, slowing your heart rate by exhaling longer than you inhale, and then getting curious and trying to find some way to validate their experience and say, yeah, that makes sense. Like, I can see that. I'm really sorry. That sounds really hard. And then if possible, help them like collaboratively problem solve, rather than what often happens is we get dysregulated, we invalidate them, they get more dysregulated, they start saying things or expressing themselves in ways that are less effective. And so I think for parents, I think that's one piece of advice. And I think that the ways that we would regulate our emotions and reduce our vulnerabilities are really the same ways that our students would, which is like, if you're sick, if you have a headache, like take care of that. If you're like, make sure that you eat like enough and that you eat things that make your body feel good. Make sure that you sleep enough and that you have like a regular sleep schedule. Like make sure that you're getting some form of exercise regularly, right? Make sure that you're doing things that challenge you and help you feel a sense of mastery. Make sure that you're like intentionally pursuing things that bring positive experiences now. Those are things that like, they're good for your kids and they're good for you. If you get a call, I don't know, like if you live on the East Coast and your kid calls you at 11 o'clock at night here, it's like 2 a.m. on the East Coast. It's really hard to be super emotionally regulated when you just got woken up in the middle of the night and you had a really long, tired day, right? There's a lot of times where I will be working both with students but mostly with patients, right? Because I don't provide therapy to my students, but I'll have someone like a patient of mine maybe call and they'll say like, hey, and they'll kind of be freaking out. They'll be having a panic attack or they'll be really upset. And sometimes the first question I ask, it'll be like 3 o'clock, 5 o'clock in the afternoon. I'll say, have you eaten anything today? What have you eaten so far? And they stop and they're like, I haven't eaten anything today. I'm like, well, a granola bar might solve the problem, right? And I don't mean that I can sound so patronizing. And yet I think a lot of times we over psychologize problems and we're like, oh, it's about like this, the emotions and the thoughts. And sometimes it really is about like, you slept 4 hours. And so this really difficult situation now feels catastrophic because you're operating on 4 hours of sleep and it's 3 o'clock in the afternoon and they didn't have breakfast or lunch. Like that could help reduce so many of the vulnerabilities to where a problem that otherwise would feel overwhelming can feel a lot more manageable. And that's true for ourselves. If we are trying to support our kids and ourselves are not taking care of our, like getting good sleep and getting exercise and eating in a balanced way and treating physical illness if we have it, then it's going to be really tough to hear what they're saying and to find the valid part so we can reflect that back to them and say, oh, like, I hear that. That makes sense. And it makes sense because, and you can find the why. And you can even say like, me too, like I feel some of those same things, or I have in the past, or even to say like everyone feels that way. Like, I don't know how many undergrads feel like super competent in the library. Like it's tricky. It's tricky to learn how to use, how to do research, how to do complex tasks that they're going to be asked to do in college, and normalizing that. That's also really validating. And that doesn't solve their problems, but it prevents us as parents from exacerbating their problems and their challenges as they transition. And it allows us to normalize it and be like, yeah, like you're having a really hard time. That makes sense because it's really tough. And that way we can focus not so much on needing to make it go away. Sometimes what makes students transition to college or their difficulties regulating their emotions more difficult is if they see them as threatening, or like that my anxiety is a sign that something is wrong, or that my sadness is a sign that something is wrong, or that my feelings of loneliness are a sign that something is wrong, but rather just accepting emotions as signals. And they're sending us messages and they're trying to communicate what's important to us. And sometimes we do have secondary emotions, meaning If we act on that emotion, it's not effective. And we can coach, and this is the type of stuff that they can get at Monsour at the counseling center, is to learn how to distinguish what is a primary emotion. If I'm being chased by a bear, fear is primary. If I am talking to my, if I'm writing an email to my professor about an assignment, fear is secondary. That means like if I act on my fear, meaning I avoid or I spend 2 hours writing a 3-sentence email, like that's not effective. And we need to be able to distinguish, is fear justified? If it is, then I need to act on it. Or if sadness is justified, if shame is justified, like act on it, that's a primary emotion, right? If anger is justified because someone is literally, I don't know, doing something to harm you or someone you care about, great. But if not, if it's a secondary emotion, then we have all sorts of strategies for like identifying the emotion, understanding the emotion. Even if it's secondary, it still makes some sense. And then learning to manage it. And I think I sort of addressed 2 different strategies generally that we can use ourselves and our kids for managing. And I would say one is we manage it by accepting it and normalizing it and allowing it, and not quickly trying to be like, oh my God, how to make this go away, but just allowing it to be there with us, because we feed our emotions by resisting them. So I would say part of it is managing it. And then another part that we can do is to use strategies to actually reduce, right, the emotion. And generally, I mean, without going into a long story, generally speaking, when there's challenges, and I think when our students face challenges in transitioning to college, I'm a psychologist, so everything, when you have a hammer, everything looks like a nail. I would say it's generally difficulties with regulating emotions. I would say like that's why transitioning to college is difficult. That's what I would say. I'm a psychologist. Maybe if you ask someone else, they would have a different idea. But I think it's essentially learning how to regulate all of the challenging emotions that come up in this process. And we do have strategies. And when we find ourselves constantly having an ineffective secondary emotion, well, then we can reduce that emotion by taking care of our physical bodies, like I mentioned a little bit ago, and we can take care of them by acting opposite to our emotion urges. So if my emotion is telling me to do something, but I know that that's a secondary emotion, that it doesn't really fit the facts and it's not effective for me to act on that emotion, then I need to actually do the opposite of that emotion. So if the emotion is saying, make sure that every word is perfect in this email to your professor and spend 45 minutes on it and send it to your mom and dad and ask them to proofread it and then send it back to you, like that's not effective. Right? You'd rather spend that time talking to your parents about what's actually important rather than help me revise this email for the 3rd time. And so acting opposite would be, I'm going to write it once and I'm going to send it quickly. Right? And even though everything inside of me is saying, don't do that, that's so scary. If I want in the long run to feel less anxious about whatever the task is, whatever it is, for each kid, it's different, then I need to act opposite to that emotion. So if I feel sad and my sadness says, just lay in bed all day today, don't go out, don't do anything, and I want to feel less of that, I need to get up, I need to get out, I need to like contact a friend, I need to get active. If I feel ashamed and I'm worried that people are going to reject me for something about my identity, then probably what I need to do is I need to share that with people who aren't going to reject me and share it again and again in a way that's open so that I can teach myself it's actually okay. And I have less and less shame or guilt or whatever the emotions are that are getting in the way of transitioning to college. And I would say, I guess my advice for parents is to practice a balance of accepting these emotions as a natural process of your child transitioning to college, and that you yourself to pay attention to these things. And sometimes when we see our kids struggling, we can't tolerate it. And our own inability to watch our kids struggle causes us to make the situation worse. And if we can allow that and model for them, normalize what it looks like to allow emotions and those difficulty, it might be the best thing that we can do for our kids as they learn to be with painful and difficult experiences that come up as they transition. So I don't know, I could say a lot more, but I think maybe I'll stop there, and I will, especially after Fiona speaks, maybe we can have some question and answer.
Thank you so much. And I think that really great information that Professor Rodriguez just offered will dovetail nicely with what I'm going to talk about. So good synchronicity here. So I'm going to try sharing my screen because I have some slides and things. Let me see if that will go. Okay, I think that worked. Okay, and let me, let's see. I always have trouble getting the slideshow to start. Let's see, here we go. There we go. Okay. Tech is the hardest part of our current modern life, the best and the worst of it. So welcome. I'm Fiona Vajk again. I'm Assistant Director and Training Director over at Monsour Counseling. I also serve as the liaison from Monsour Counseling to Pitzer College. We serve all 7 Cs, but we have a liaison relationship where a designated staff person consults frequently with the student affairs staff at each of the individual colleges. So I know Pitzer particularly well, and I have a special fondness in my heart for Pitzer. It's a special place. So I'm going to talk a little bit about what we often see at the counseling center from students in stress due to their adjustment to college. And I'm sure for some of the parents attending this, it's your first students being sent off to college, and for some you're veterans and you've sent another child off to college before. But what we often see in the first year, and of course nothing's universal, people are incredibly complex and varied, but often this is sort of the pattern we see. Very often at first, there's sort of a honeymoon period. They're excited. They've been waiting for this a long time, especially with COVID going on. They're all just glad to be back on a campus and just, excited about everything. And then at some point, and this may be hours later, days later, or weeks later, but at some point, that honeymoon comes to an end. They will find out that, like everything in life, no place is absolutely perfect in every way for one's individual preferences. No place is going to be that. And so they will run into something that is not to their liking in some way. And some of them just really hit a wall at that point. And at that point, they may start to think about, the grass is greener. They may start to question back, well, there was this other college I was considering. Maybe I should have gone there. Maybe I should have gone somewhere bigger, in a more urban area. Maybe I should have gone to this place closer to home, further from home, you name it. And it's normal to kind of question those things during this period of time. They may also struggle with feeling like they can't go back home. So you can't go backwards. So they kind of maybe sort of in a little bit of a wandering through the wilderness kind of phase. I think it's best for parents to just be, as much as possible, parents and families, to be just patient with this and not overreact to it, because it is common. Students will even sometimes talk about transferring. I think the best thing to do if they do bring that up is just to allow them to explore the idea. Don't panic. Most students that consider, like, maybe I made the wrong choice and I should have gone somewhere else, most students eventually end up settling back down to, actually, even though this place isn't perfect, it's pretty good. I'm pretty happy here. I do really like this cool psychology class I get to take with Professor Rodriguez, and I really like my roommate. And, they may start really being a little happier as time goes on. What I would say is, if they're bringing those things up, I would encourage 2 things. One is, think about it. Just let the idea sit there. Don't rush to a decision. There's no hurry here. We have months to probably decide that kind of thing. Let it sit there as an idea, but at the same time, in the meantime, there's no downside to trying to make your life now at Pitzer as good as you can make it. So let's focus your energies on how good can you get this to be here and now, and hold that other possibility there too. But let's really focus for the immediate moment on how good can we get things now, and sort of see where the points are that are not making you so happy. Let's see what we can do to improve that. And then you can make a really fair decision later about how good could you get it here, and would changing where you're located be good for you or not. But let's kind of defer that decision a bit. Let's first focus on making it good here. Often students start to kind of do better, then they may kind of go up and down between like a renewed fear of failure. Even after things seem to stabilize, they kind of often, when there's a bit of a setback, all adjustment tends to be 2 steps forward and 1 step back, 2 steps forward, 1 step back. And when they get a step back, they may fear all that steps forward. That was just an illusion. I'm back to nothing. It's like, I'm not adjusting well. I'm not coping. And then of course, there's the tendency to compare your insides to everybody else's outsides. So all the students are acting like, I'm fine, I'm great, I'm adjusting, everything's cool. And inside, a lot of those students are having the same anxieties and insecurities too. But they're often not like shouting it out in the middle of the quad and making an announcement that they're struggling. So students tend to feel that I'm one of the only ones that's having a hard time, and it's often not true. It's a hard first year. It's a big transition. And I imagine particularly after this whale of a year we've just had with the lockdown and such a weird senior year for the students coming in, or frankly the sophomores coming in that had to do their first year remote at Pitzer, there's going to be just a ton of tough adjustments. So this is going to be very, very normal and a fairly universal experience, in fact. And then eventually what we hope is that things kind of do fall together into place. And some signs that your student is adjusting in a healthy way. They're getting involved in some way in their college community. They show optimism. They're having some relationships. Their typical social pattern will probably be similar to what they do at college. So if they in high school were a real social butterfly, they'll probably do something similar here. If they had one or two really close friends that were just meaningful, deep relationships, and they didn't have 50 friends, but they had some really good ones, they'll probably do something similar here too once things sort of settle out and stabilize. But they'll hopefully be spending most of their free time on campus, rather than if you're semi-local, students that want to come home kind of every weekend. That can be a little bit of a yellow flag of like, are you not kind of getting roots enough in the Pitzer community? Hopefully they're maintaining adequate sleep, adequate nutrition. I should put an asterisk by that because the college student schedule tends to be later at night, but then they also get up a little later than most of us working stiffs. So it usually is okay as long as they're getting, 7 to 8 hours-ish most nights. Hopefully that's what it looks like. Signs of possible difficulties, of course, sort of isolation, irritability, in particular irritability and low mood that persists for a couple weeks or more, if it's sort of not getting better day after day after day. These are all times that you might want to remember for them that they have the counseling center and send them over to us. And I'll talk in a minute about a little bit more about our services. But if they're skipping classes, or going, like I said, going home every weekend, sleeping or eating poorly, showing relationship difficulties or poor concentration, you know your student well, much better than we do, of course, at this point. And so I think what baseline looks like for them. We would expect everyone to be more stressed than usual for the first few weeks. It's a big adjustment. But if things are sort of not getting better as much as you would expect for this person, that might be a time too to encourage them to come check out the counseling center or other resources that can help them. So being tolerant of the adjustment process, knowing that it's going to be a bit of a roller coaster. What Jill was referring to earlier in the session, the tearful phone call phenomenon. We hear this a lot. And I know this is true in my own experience too. As a college student, I tended to call my mom when things went badly. I would have a bunch of great days in a row. I'm happy as a clam and I don't even think about calling home. And suddenly I have a difficult day and I'm just, losing my composure in every way possible, and I call mom. And so I'm crying on the phone and she kind of patches me up and makes me feel better, and I get back to it. And then I don't call her again for a few days because I'm feeling better. And then next time I feel wretched, I call mom. And so all she's getting are these tearful phone calls and doesn't think, oh, things are basically okay with some bumps in the road, which is very normal. So just ask your student, I think. Just what I would say is don't assume that just because you only see them miserable, that means they're miserable 24/7 all year, all month, all week. But do ask, just ask, is this a particularly rough day? Have all the days been like this? How many good days do you feel like you've had? How many rough days? Just to get a sense of, it's okay that they call you more when they're upset. That actually is a nice sign. That means you're their safe person that they want to reach out to. But just know that you might not be seeing a representative sample of what they're really feeling like most of the time, most days. And then just encouraging them to kind of self-define as an adult, trying to establish a more adult rapport with them. And this is going to be a big adjustment for both parents and students. I have my own kids, and every time they reach a new developmental stage, there's that ambivalence of, I'm excited for them. This is what I want. This is a sign that the things are going the way they should. And I miss the old stage, and so there's that ambivalence, but really encouraging them to, when they have a problem, thinking through with them how they could solve it, as opposed to thinking, how can I help solve it for them, which is an appropriate thing to do when they're younger. And as they're now stepping into their more adult life, it could be like, well, what do you think? Do you think it would help to go, to send an email to your professor explaining the situation? Do you think it would help to reach out to the dean of students office? Do you think, seeing what they can do to try to solve their problem? And then let them come to you with needs. Maybe even have a chat about what you're hoping they'll do in terms of what level of communication, how often you expect to hear from them, and also what you'd like them to do. And just checking in about the best way to support them and what they want that to look like, because there's not one cookie cutter parent-child relationship, of course. And now turning a little bit to your own adjustment process. This is a big transition for the parents too. The parents and other grown-ups in their life. It's common to feel anxiety about how they'll do, and it doesn't mean you don't have faith in your student. Doesn't mean you're doubting them, but it's normal. There's a lot at stake. It's so important to go through these years and get all sorts of good development to happen, and that can look a ton of different ways. But you want it to go well for them, and that's normal. You worry about their safety, particularly with the global pandemic going on. Of course, everybody's anxious about those things. We just worry about them being far away. They're not under my roof anymore. You may feel some envy of their opportunities. You've taken some of the campus virtual tours or even in person, and you see this, when you drop them off, they're beautiful campuses, and they're, I know the dining hall food is so much better than it was when I was a student, and there's so many amenities and things that they have available that it was a different ballgame when I went, and so it's okay to feel a little twinge of like, oh man, I wish I could have that. That doesn't make you a bad parent, that just makes you human. Being a little bit uncomfortable with things in their lives that are new, and you're not going to know all of their friends as well as one used to when they were, again, under your roof, and their friends probably came over and you really had a sense of who was in their world. And now they'll tell you about it and so on, but it's going to be probably different. And that's just an adjustment that just acknowledge that can be hard and a little bit scary as a parent, just to have to let go a little bit of knowing all about it. There may be a sense of loneliness, a sense of loss, but also there might be a sense of joy and relief. This also doesn't make you a bad parent. If to some extent you're kicking up your heels a little bit, that to some extent the hard part of this marathon that is parenting is coming to an end of that phase of it anyway. They'll still need you, but it's in a different way, and it's much less daily hands-on work. So it's okay to feel a sense of like, hey, we did it. Pat yourselves on the back. You got them into a wonderful, good school, and they're launching, and that's exciting. And you may feel some pride, some justified pride that they're away at school. As a side note, I will say I worked at a few different college counseling centers along the way in my training before I settled here, and I've been here for 15 years now because it's a great place to work, and I've been really happy. So I sort of put down roots here. But compared to other colleges and universities I did work at before, I will say this is a really supportive place for your student to be at. They, when I call over with appropriate permissions, of course, to the student affairs office, just to maybe fill them in on a student and ask if there's some way that they can perhaps help the students get kind of some leniency from professors because there's a mental health thing going on or what have you. I know they're always happy to take my call. They're always glad to be looped in. Somebody in the student affairs department probably knows the student and has a relationship with them already. It's very sort of high touch, very supportive place. So I think on that front, from my perspective, I feel like you chose a good spot. For your students to be. In terms of your own transition as a parent, it's good to just accept how you're feeling about it, even if it's all over the map. Just be really patient with yourself. This is a big deal for the student and for you. Reach out for connection and support wherever you can from people that you trust to be sort of supportive and validating of how you're going through this. It's okay if you have a spouse or partner and they're going through it in a very different way from you. Neither of you is wrong. So just give yourselves and each other space to feel differently about it, to cope differently with it. That's okay too. And then try to focus on your own needs, your interests and hobbies that maybe you haven't had as much time for, and now you hopefully have a little more. Your relationships, with the family members still in the home, with friendships, other things where you can kind of focus that time and energy. That will also be a little bit of a distraction from the big, overwhelming, stuff that you're going to go through in this big transition. It's good to sort of acknowledge that things have changed and there's some loss attached to that if you're going to miss having them around. And yet also it's good to sort of deliberately try to turn your attention to notice some positive aspects of this change. Sort of maybe the additional free time or just, being proud that they are launching and that's actually a good thing, even if it's bittersweet for us. If you're feeling very raw right after you drop off your student, I don't recommend going home and going into their bedroom and sitting and marinating in it. It won't help. It will only intensify this sad loss feeling. Maybe go out to dinner, maybe somewhere with outdoor dining, so it's safe. Go somewhere, go on a hike, go somewhere. Get yourself a little bit distracted if it's very raw and intense right away. If it's possible to do, if you can, I also recommend waiting to change their home bedroom. I know a lot of times people have their eye on that space and they really want that extra home office, and you may need to change it right away. I know that sometimes just got to happen. But what I've sometimes had happen is students maybe go home for the first time over the either the fall break or the Thanksgiving break or perhaps the winter holiday, and they haven't been home in months, and they get home and all of a sudden their bed maybe is technically there, but there's a bunch of storage boxes in there, or it's been converted to the parent's home office, or a different sibling has moved in and they don't feel like there's a space for them anymore the same way, and it has a lot of symbolic value. So if you do need the space, I totally understand that, but what I would say is communicate with your student about that so it doesn't sort of blindside them when they first go home. They probably won't be able to articulate, I need to feel like my home base is still there waiting for me. Like I could fly back into the nest anytime if I needed to. They won't probably say that they want that psychologically, but they do. And if you do, again, it's okay to use the room, but I would at least involve them in the change if you can, get their ideas even about how to arrange it so that they still have a space when they come home on breaks. And also just make sure it's not a surprise, because that can come as a shock. And then just give yourself a lot of credit for a job well done. Here you are, you've gotten your students into kids or college. It's a great place for them to be. You can really feel good about them kind of transitioning to this new phase of their life. Okay, so turning to Monsour counseling, as I mentioned, we serve all 7 Cs. We are open 8:30 to 5, Monday through Friday, all fall and spring semester. We are also looking into adding, we're 99% going to add some evening hour appointments too. I know some students have a really jam-packed schedule right up to 5 every day, so we're going to have some evening appointments available as well. They just need to call us and inquire. We have psychologists, therapists, as well as psychiatrists, and all students are eligible for our services completely free of charge. It's already sort of included in the fees. It's built in. There's no extra charge to come see us. How we structure things these days is we have an initial brief assessment that's about 20-25 minutes. And that one of our therapists will speak with the student, get a sort of overview sense of what kind of support they're looking for, and make a recommendation about the best place to be seen. Just due to reasons of numbers, the number of students that would like long-term therapy versus the number of therapists we have, we can't offer long-term services. So we do offer short-term goal-oriented therapy. So if it's sort of a presenting concern that's pretty appropriate for a brief, sort of more focused course of treatment, we'll refer them in to be seen with one of our Monsour counseling therapists. So adjustment to college would be probably a perfect example of what would fit right into that. But lots of other sorts of concerns, relationship breakups, roommate relationship difficulties, family stresses at home. There's a range of things that might be a good fit for a brief therapy. But if they need something either very long-term or more specialized than we have in-house, we also have a pretty good network of referrals that we can give students. We can kind of work with them to find out what kind of insurance they have, what their preferences are in terms of, if they have preferences in terms of the gender identity or racial identity or any of the therapist characteristics. We have a pretty good referral list. And these days, so many therapists have moved to also having teletherapy practice, that we're not just limited to therapists right in the Claremont area, of which there are actually surprisingly a fair number, but also we can go into LA or wherever. So we have a lot of good options. We offer groups and workshops. This semester in particular, we're going to be offering a handful of workshops where students can drop in and discuss just kind of their feelings about having sort of lived through the pandemic so far, and as it continues to evolve, any kind of COVID related stresses, we're going to have some processing time around that. We are also going to offer a weekly drop-in group in case any students, knock on wood, this will be rare, but any students that need to quarantine or self-isolate because of either a COVID exposure or positive test result, we are going to have a drop-in group weekly for just to support students with some coping strategies if they're in that position. We're calling it Don't Isolate in Isolation. So we're going to have that available. And then psychiatry and medication services are available at our center too. So especially for students who are out of state and want someone in state to be managing their medications, we do have that available too. The visits are free of charge for students. They'll still, of course, have to pay their copay or whatever it is when they get the prescription filled to actually get the medications themselves, but the visits are covered with our service. And then we have crisis and on-call services 24 hours a day, 365 days a year, including during breaks. If you just call our main number, the voicemail will prompt you to press 1 to speak immediately to the on-call or therapist, and then they'll kind of assess the needs from there. And then for now, because of the Delta variant and everything going on and the mask mandates, our default mode right now is to offer services remotely via telehealth, because we found it's better to be able to really see their face. We get a lot of information from their nonverbals, and they see my face too, and they can see I'm listening to them, caring about what they say, connecting. And if you can only see my eyes, it's just not the same. So we found that it's just actually better for now, rather than both of us sitting there masked. But we are in person and open. So if somebody really needs to be seen in person for some reason, we will do that. We can, and we're here and we're available for that. It's just that our default is going to be teletherapy. And we also are going to make available a couple rooms within our offices for students that have trouble finding a private space to have their therapy session. If they have like a roommate and they don't have a designated hour that they know they can have some privacy, they can come to our offices and be in a private room where then they can close the door, and then they can again be mask free but have their Zoom session from our center. So that's our current plan there. This is just a long list of many reasons students come to see us, but from everything from adjustment to substance use concerns, difficulty concentrating, body image, depression or anxiety, just the mental health impact of COVID is a valid reason, you name it. We are, of course, a confidential service. All the sort of typical laws and regulations for mental health care apply, and our records are completely separate from the academic files. And then lastly, just to let you know about this as well, we have 7c.health, which is basically a service that students, and students are going to get all this information too in their orientations and so on, but it's just great for the parents to have it, because sometimes they hear a lot of information the first couple of weeks and then they forget once it's needed 4 months from now, they might not remember. So I'm telling you too, so you can remind them. 7c.health has drop-in teletherapy on demand for students, but we've also added a functionality now too, where via 7c.health, they can schedule ongoing weekly appointments with the same provider. If they met with somebody and they like them, they can schedule ahead to meet with that same person again. So it sort of is just another option for students. And also the students with the student health insurance via Aetna also have behavioral teletherapy appointments available through Aetna as well. So there's a lot of, and I think it's Teledoc, the link there. So there's a lot of options available for students to get good care. And that's it for my spiel. That's a picture of our sort of front door there. And students will walk into that if they come in either to make an appointment or if they're in crisis and they need to be seen right away. We always do have somebody available in person on weekdays too to see crisis appointments in person. So that's my spiel. And of course, feel free to ask any questions in the Q&A as well if you have anything you want clarified. Thanks so much.
Excellent. Well, thanks to both of you. I want to ask, this information is great. And I did notice too on your website, Dr. Vajk, that you have great information too, and a little video from your staff. So folks can visit your website as well. We have just one question, but I want to see Professor Rodriguez. Are there comments that you want to make at this point, or do you want to?
I think we take comments or questions from parents if they want to jump in, ask questions, or interact with us. I don't know if they can like come into this section so we can see them. If they want that, I would welcome it.
Okay. Well, while we're While folks are thinking about that, there is a question about a prescription Focaline for ADHD. Is that something that the psychiatrist is available to meet with as well?
Yeah, the answer is a little bit of a complicated one when it comes to ADHD stimulant medication, just to make sure that students that are being given stimulant prescriptions, are definitely being appropriately prescribed. Our psychiatrists will prescribe ADHD medications for students if they have recent testing. They need to submit it to us. We'll review the testing, and then if everything looks copacetic, then they can kind of make the psychiatrist appointment. If they're already on an existing prescription, it's helpful to send us that as well. And then we can kind of make a determination, and then often they'll just be happy to continue the same medication if it's sort of working for the student and they're stable on it, and they were sort of put on it appropriately in the first place. But just basically, so it's a little bit case by case in terms of we want to see the documentation in terms of what testing was done. So just I would say just reach out to us, show us whatever documentation that you have, and then we have an ADHD and learning disability specialist. He will review the documentation and then kind of communicate with you about whatever else is needed before, and then after that we can go ahead and make the psychiatry appointment for that.
So we have two other questions. One is if we're doing similar sessions with students, and I know there is a full orientation schedule, so I wanted to ask if Fiona, if there's any details you have about that. And then also, go ahead.
Yeah, no, go ahead.
Okay, and the second question is just how parents and families can encourage their students to reach out for support.
Yeah, okay, great. Yeah, I know that they always do, and I don't have the orientation schedule yet for exactly what information when, but yes, I know there's like resource tabling where the counseling center goes, and lots of other wonderful resources from campus too, but also I know they're given sort of informational sessions with the same kind of set of information about our services and so on. We also will be emailing students. I know they get a lot of emails, so I don't know if they always read everything, but I know they will be getting an email reminder that we're here and this is how to make an appointment, and also here's all the groups and workshops we'll be offering, and they'll get that email blast either the week before or the week that classes start. To get all that information as well. In terms of how to encourage them to reach out, I mean, two things that I like to try to use as a selling point. One is just that honestly, college is probably the last time in your life that therapy is just going to be completely free. From then on, it's usually there's some kind of copay at a minimum. So, it's expensive later. So, you may as well use it while you're in college if you can. But also, so a statistic I like to share is that the exact number varies year to year, but approximately between 17-18% of Pitzer students in any given year usually come and see us. So if you know 6 Pitzer students, you probably know somebody that's been to the counseling center this year. It's commonly used, so it's not. People can come see us for small concerns, big ones. It's really, we're here to be supportive, and a lot of students do take advantage of it. So it doesn't make you kind of weird or something, to go and use that. And frankly, I think it makes you smart to take advantage of it while you can. The last thing that's sometimes helpful is if it's useful to talk about the session, you can sort of be like, well, I talked to this, Fiona person, and she seems pretty approachable, and she's a little short lady, she talks to her hands a lot. You can make it seem a little bit less like going to some faceless entity. We also, on our website, we do have our staff bios with pictures as well, so students can kind of browse through that and see if there's somebody that they just think, by the looks of it and the description, like that seems like somebody I'd be more comfortable talking to. They can sort of request to talk to that person in particular if that feels more comfortable for them. So that's all hopefully helpful ways to kind of encourage them to try to reach out.
Yeah. I guess one thing I would maybe add to like suggestions for how parents can encourage their child to reach out might be like just observing your own limits as a parent. Like if you're having like an hour-long conversation, providing like soothing for your child, or if it just seems like it's beyond your capability to like help them with it, then just reflect that honestly and say like, hey, I wonder if it would be helpful to have someone else that you could talk about this with, because I'm really, really happy to help you and support you. And it also seems like you would really benefit from having others who can have input on this issue and guide you, who are also more familiar with the setting that you're in. So I think sometimes just being open about like, yeah, I don't have the answer. I don't know. And maybe if you work with someone else, you know, together, all of us combined, could come up with the best approach for you.
Excellent. I also want to say too that from the student affairs perspective, my former position, really encouraging students that this is their service. It belongs to them. They have it now. They, you know, it's paid for, you know, as you say, Dr. Vajk. So, and to give it more than one shot, you know, if they can't, you know, so, you know, if we all could do one thing to solve what is going on for us, we would have all done it. So this is a process and to give it a shot. So I encourage families to do that as well. And I do have to say, just to reflect back on my own experience, I did exactly what you did, or discussed, Dr. Vajk, to take advantage of the Monsour Counseling Center my senior year. And it was really a wonderful experience to work with the therapist there. So any other thoughts that you have that or questions that you know you often answer that we haven't asked or touched upon?
Yeah, I'm trying to think.
And could you also mention, okay, what about stress and exams and students who feel that they need more time? Is that one of the topics that, you know, your brief counseling that, scenarios that you talked about?
Yeah, absolutely. I mean, that would certainly be a good reason to chat to us for support. I know that in addition, if they need extra time, that kind of academic accommodation, the place to start with would be with Gabriela Tempestoso. She does the sort of student accommodations disability services. So maybe speaking to her initially about, you know, getting formal accommodations for extra time on exams. That's probably the best starting place for that. We also have a 7C Student Disability Resource Center that they're welcome to touch base there as well. And they often have workshops and things around specific academic strategies for things like test anxiety, but also just all sorts of other kind of study aids and help on kind of good strategies. A lot of the students that come to Pitzer are so smart and so quick that they didn't actually learn to study well because they didn't have to in high school. And all of a sudden the college classes are a big jump in difficulty, and suddenly they haven't had to really like structure their studying and their crafting of papers, but now they're bigger and they're more complex, and they might need those strategies, but students that struggled more in high school developed them then. They didn't maybe need them. They breezed through on their high IQ, and now they're like, I don't know how to systematically really come at this when it's this level of difficulty. And so that reaching out to the SDRC is a great place to get some strategies. And I know Pitzer has some academic coaches too available as well to kind of supplement building those kinds of skills as well.
I think also like talking to professors, right? Like if a student is stressed about an assignment or a test, the best thing they can do is just to because sometimes the stress is a lack of clarity, right? And that's, I guess there are parts of the stress that can be solved and parts of it that they just have to like sort of carry with them and say, yeah, I feel anxious about this. I really want to get a really good grade. And I just need to take that anxiety with me and that stress and go do the assignment. But sometimes, again, it is a signal of like, I don't actually know what the professor wants, or I'm not actually sure that I understood the content. And again, the advantage of coming to Pitzer and not going to like a huge college with like 100 kids in each class is that the professor has time for that. And we have office hours for that, and we have meetings for that. And it's not a TA. And so I would say trying to distinguish, like, is this just, I'm afraid of failing, or is it like I don't actually know what is needed to succeed? Because there are two different problems. And if they don't know what they need to succeed, then they need to talk to their professor, and if they don't understand what's needed, probably it's because the professor didn't make it super clear, right? And I do that. Sometimes I think it's super clear and it just wasn't. Like I have a hard time mentalizing my students' experience of what it is that I expect from them. And I appreciate when they're like, hey, I don't actually know what I'm supposed to do here. And that's what's stressing me out. Rather than just trying to make the stress go away, figure out what parts of that are adaptive and useful, and listen to those emotions. And the part that's just like, oh my gosh, I'm afraid of failing, like having repeated thoughts like that isn't useful. So probably distracting from those types of thoughts would be more effective, or learning to embrace them and be like, yeah, here I am. I'm writing this paper and I'm also having the thought that this is a terrible paper and I can't really make that thought stop right now. And that's okay. I'm going to keep writing this paper as best I can. And that is something that most, forget students, most people don't want to do. They feel like once that thought that I'm writing a terrible paper goes away, then I'll start writing a good paper. And the other approach is, well, I'm going to have both at the same time. And it's increasing that resilience and that flexibility that I think is a part of the goal.
That is an excellent response. That is just so on target. And that's for all of us. So we have two questions I just want to fit in if we can. If a student is feeling, shy or fear of being overheard, to actually make appointments with the counseling center is one. So just, I guess, some advice on how to encourage them. And then also if there's neuropsych testing or referrals to local test providers.
Okay, yeah, sure. So for the first one, if they're feeling shy to call in, if it's about just making the initial appointment, they can walk in to make the appointment face to face just during business hours, Monday through Friday. They can just kind of swing by, wait till the lobby's fairly empty and then duck in and come say hi and make that appointment. As I alluded to, there are also a couple offices within our center that they could do the teletherapy session from inside our center if they would like. So that way they wouldn't be overheard. They'd be away from their dorm and so on. And if it's just about the initial call to make the appointment too, that they can probably just walk around campus in the middle of some open quad where they're like 50 feet away from anybody and just be like, hey, they can also email actually to make their appointment if they want to just go to our website. Our different staff emails are linked to our staff bios. If they want to just email us directly, either, myself or the receptionist, they can just email directly and be like, hey, I want to make an appointment, and we can get them settled that way too. So any of those methods is fine. As far as neuropsych testing, we don't have neuropsych testing in-house, unfortunately, but we do offer referrals to local providers who do offer that service. So we're just have them. There's actually a referral form on our website where if all they need is, if they know that I just want referrals for neuropsych testing, they don't have to make a special appointment to talk to us about that. If they know that's what they need, they can fill out our referral form and then just explain, oh, I'm just looking for neuropsych testing referrals. And then we'll email the student back with local referrals, and they can kind of specify any people that accept Blue Cross or whatever their specifications are that they need.
Great. Well, excellent. I really want to, on behalf of our audience and Pitzer, just thank you so much for this. I have to read, thank you very much for all of the info you shared, and especially for the parent adjustment advice. That was exactly what I needed to hear now. So I echo that. I think everyone who is a parent or a mentor of someone going through a transition, this was a really helpful session, and particularly, of course, because it's Pitzer specific. So thank you both so much. And again, thank you to our audience for coming. The session is recorded, so it's viewable at any point in time for anybody. And so I'll just, before we close, put a note in that tomorrow we have our sessions with international programs and study abroad, and then also a special session with some family leadership council members and our director of annual giving about how the Pitzer community came together to support our students, our college, and our core values during COVID-19 and beyond. And so we encourage you to come. So thank you again, everybody, and have a great day.